was a year ago this week that we, like you, like other businesses, made what we thought was a difficult decision, and we closed our building. I went back, as you can if you would like, through our Facebook page to find the video of the Friday night service from a year ago. It's almost comical to look back at what that night was like. That Friday night, Cantor Kathy and I, we shared this podium. We stood right next to each other as she belted out in song, no mask, no barrier between us. That night, our co-presidents, Mike and Bob, were right here, right behind us. They handed me the Kiddush cup. They offered their opening words. We had Barbara Renstrom read Torah from this podium. We took the Torah out of the ark. We put it before all of us. We all stood around each other. All things that today seem so foreign to us. And we thought at the time that it would just be a couple of weeks, like a really bad cold. Tonight, we look back on a year separated, what I call a surprising sabbatical. On that night a year ago, when the world seemed to come to a sudden halt, as I watched the service, I reminded myself that I spoke about the fact that as we looked ahead, as we went through what would be those treacherous weeks of change, that we would learn a lot of things about ourselves, and that we wouldn't be able to predict what we could learn. And now, a year later, it's time to take account of what we have learned and what we continue to learn as we have become accustomed to this sabbatical. And that's why I call it a sabbatical. Sabbaticals are supposed to be sudden and extended breaks where we learn and where we change, where our routine is broken, where the things that we take for granted are challenged. In the Talmud, sabbaticals are talked about from an agricultural perspective because the rabbis declared that the people had to give the land that they worked every day a break, a whole year without working their land. And they write that when during the sabbatical year one sees their field abandoned, when one looks out at their trees and sees that no one is taking the fruit, when the fences that mark the edge of your property become overgrown with vines and weeds, when you see that the food that you would have brought to your own table is being eaten by animals out in the wild, that what we learn from those moments are that not everything is for us. We learn to suppress our selfish desires, they say. And we learn not to speak so much because we learn to listen and look and observe at what's out in the world. And at the end of that sabbatical, we begin to realize that we actually have more now than we ever thought we would have before. Rabbi Sidney Greenberg wrote that it often takes a serious threat to our blessings to make us aware of them, which is why he writes that if we were asked to draw up a list of our assets, that we would probably never think of mentioning things like our vision, our body, our sanity, our ability to eat or speak as the most important assets that we have. And so tonight, I thought about what are the assets that we lost this year that we would have never put on a list a year ago were it not for this sudden sabbatical. Top of my list, health. And not just that I have my health, but I can no longer take for granted how unsettling, how anxiety-ridden it is for people when they get that first notice from a doctor that their health is not what they thought it was, that their life, their existence, their ability to do what they want to do, perhaps is uncertain. How many times prior to this pandemic have people felt exactly as we all felt this year at some point? They hear that they may have cancer, and everything in their world stops. They stop going outside their house because they've been told that their immune system might be so weak that they could die from a simple hug. During this sabbatical, we gained empathy for those facing uncertain futures. We know how they feel now. Perhaps not exactly, but we know a taste of it even if we've never had cancer ourselves. The feeling of not being in control of what comes next, the feeling of not knowing, the feeling of not being able to be around those you love who can comfort you. We know that feeling now. We've seen it during our sabbatical, and so we've gained the asset of greater empathy. And we've gained the opposite of that, the asset of togetherness, of being in a room with people, because we've missed, as we've sat like the rabbis talk about the farmer looking out at the fences being overgrown, we've sat in our places and we've looked out our windows and we've missed the celebrations. The celebrations of in stadiums that are filled with people, or even the moments in need of comfort when mourners fill a sanctuary. After this year, how could we ever take that for granted? The joy, the feeling of togetherness that comes when we're in a crowd, it's an asset we now will hold so dear. What about the ability to travel freely? Not only to see sights, as we might have said a year ago. If we were to say, what are the best travels that you've been able to experience in your life, would we have not listed the most exotic places we've gone? But now we would say, no, it's to see my children and grandchildren, to visit a sibling or an old friend, to go see new babies who were born, to be at a b'nai mitzvah. The next time we get an invitation in the mail for a wedding, don't you think we'll hold it, look at it for a little while, and feel so blessed that we've been invited to gather and celebrate a couple that loves each other? We might even say Shehechianu in that moment. Holding an invitation, thank you, God, that I've been invited and that I can attend a place where I can dance with other people, celebrate newlyweds who look out at their bright future. For some, this year has taught us the asset of having time to ourselves. Some have learned it because we've had an excess of such time. Time alone, time in the quiet. And others, with children at home for a year, not going to school, or perhaps who had parents or friends who moved in with them to stay safe. We've learned the asset of having time to ourselves, perhaps because we missed it. We may have gone a whole year not having been alone. What will that quiet walk on the beach feel like? What will it mean to us the next time we get a chance to take it by choice? What will it mean when our footsteps are not the only ones making marks in the sand? We won't take it for granted, that's for sure. And finally, what about our asset to adapt? It used to be the case that people looked at the youngest in our congregation in awe. Carrie and I would see the eyes looking at our children, just as we had looked at our children in their youngest days, looking at a toddler who knew how to unlock an iPhone by swiping their thumb to the right before they could ever talk. We expect the youngest generation to be able to learn the newest technologies and techniques in our world. But during this sabbatical year, did we not learn that every generation is capable of dynamic growth? Grandchildren slid iPads under doors to their octogenarian grandparents. And that became a window. Not just a figurative window, but a literal window, because even the word window now means something different. Windows aren't on walls, windows are on screens. And Zoom is not a part of a camera that helps you see something closer, that helps you capture a moment. Zoom now, well, of course, Zoom is a part of our lives. It makes a moment. Zoom is a verb or a place that we go to meet people. We Zoom each other. Look at all these terms we learned and tools we gained, ways that we can connect. We adapted during all of these times. In a few moments, Cantor Kathy will read from the Torah the very last words of the book of Exodus. In these words, we are told that Moses stands outside the tabernacle, the holy tent in the wilderness, and he cannot enter because God is filling the entirety of that space. And so Moses stands patiently, waiting for the moment when he can enter into that divine place. Here we are after this year-long sabbatical, and we can look back and look at the ways in which, in our patience, we have come to value these assets that a year ago we would never have put on a list. And we'll wait a little bit longer, like Moses, for the moment when we can cross that threshold. As we wait patiently for the moment when we can return to a world that is full of divine experiences. As I flipped through our videos from the past year, if you look a little bit past the service that we had a year ago, there's a recording that I made on my phone that we placed on Facebook before we ever were really using Facebook seriously. It's a recording in this sanctuary of our kids dancing to the music of Cantor Kathy and Josh Goldberg, who were here. He had come here for a concert last fall. Kids dancing together, parents clapping in the background, running around our sanctuary, jumping onto each other. No masks, no barriers, loud music. We wait patiently for the moment when we can do that again. And the great blessing is that when we do, we won't take it for granted that we can dance with each other and sing with each other and be together, seeing each other's faces. Like Moses standing outside that tent, waiting to enter, to have that divine moment. I believe we've learned more of what those divine assets are in our world this year. So when it is safe to return to our sanctuaries and our stadiums and our celebrations, I believe we will see more of what we are grateful for than we ever did before. For that is what we will have learned from this surprising sabbatical year. Shabbat Shalom.